Hi, everyone. This is Nelly van Doornharder from Ordinary People, Saintly Souls. And today I want to talk about someone who's actually quite dear to my heart. She was a really good friend, and she was also my teacher, and she was a great scholar. She is from Norway. She used to live in Oslo her whole life. And in Norway, or in Scandinavia for that matter, she's quite famous for the writings and for appearing on TV and radio programs and explaining everything that had to do with the world of Islam and the Middle East and everything that also was complicated about religious issues. I considered Kari Vogt not just a good friend, but I also considered her saintly. By her behavior, by the way she modeled a certain behavior. And that is why I called her a saintly academic. I don't think she would like me to do that. She was always extremely humble. And as you know, on this channel, I interview people who have visions, or I will talk about people. I plan to talk about several people who are considered saintly because of the power of their intercessions, or because miracles happened because they interceded on behalf of someone. But Kari does not fit that category. She basically fits the category of someone that James Finley has been talking about a lot on his podcast about the mystics. He said, each saintly person has their own genius. They give witness to our divine nature. And we all have flashes of this quality of the holy nature in our own lives. So what do they teach? They teach dignity. They teach us to look at reality, not go off in the clouds and just live in dreams, but look at what life is showing you. They teach us the complexity of the human experience. What does it mean to be human? How can you be yourself? How can you be real? And if nothing else, Kari was always very real, very true to herself. So they model the human experience as it is illuminated by faith, and they live a life of goodwill. Kari was a devout Catholic, and I'm coming back to that in a minute. But most of all, Kari focused on what was essential. I very seldom heard her gossip or waste time on empty words. She focused on what was good, what was educational, what was uplifting, what was encouraging, and what was essential. In many ways, she reminded me of a quote by the famous mystic and saint, John of the Cross. God grants to some to understand that everything remains to be understood. She was always studying, and she always saw the presence of the divine in everybody she met. She traveled a lot. She's been all over the world. And I was very privileged to share some of these travels with her. And I'm going to show you just some pictures about with the places that we have been together. But most of all, this was Indonesia, by the way. I used to live there for a long time. And she only once came to Indonesia. That was during a conference. Most of all, we went to Egypt, where we together visited the Coptic Orthodox Church and Coptic Orthodox leaders or believers or friends. And here we are at audience with the Coptic Orthodox Pope, Tawadros II. And we are surrounded by a few friends. One of them is Sister Rauth, the nun, and her mom, who's sitting at the end on the left side, and our dear friend, Magda Kamal, who often came with us. Here we are with the Bishop of Youth, the Coptic Orthodox Bishop of Youth, Bishop Musa. And one of the reasons we visited him is that he was a disciple of one of Kari's favorites, and for that matter, one of my favorites too. I will make some videos about him, Bishop Athanasius of Beni Suef. I'll be coming back to him in a minute. This is a retreat center on the way between Cairo and Alexandria called Anaphora, and Kari loved to visit that center. And here, for example, she is going through the glass of the hall of mirrors and looking through a looking glass. And behind her is the bishop of the center, Bishop Thomas. And she loved to have debates with Bishop Thomas about everything to do with the Coptic Orthodox Church, with life, with the Bible, his interpretation of texts, and so on and so on. And here again, we are joined by Magda, or Maggie, as we fondly call her. Now, this is a picture of St. Anthony, because that is basically how we met. And let me explain. We met somewhere during the 1980s while I was living in Cairo and working there. And my roommate, Nora Stene, was a PhD student. And she told me that her supervisor was visiting her and was very interested in the Coptic Orthodox Church. And for some reason, Nora must have arranged that Kari and I would meet. And we met in the garden of the Swedish embassy, where she was staying, because the wife of the ambassador at that time was a good friend of hers. And we were there joined by a scholar also of Coptic studies called Samuel Rubenson. And he was working on his dissertation about the letters of St. Anthony. And that is why you see this picture here. This is St. Anthony. St. Anthony lived in between the 3rd and 4th century. And according to the tradition, he is the first monk in the history of Christianity. He was the first one who went into the desert to find a solitary life. And I remember vividly that Samuel told us about the fact that the letter showed him that St. Anthony was really not the simple, almost illiterate monk people made him to be, that the tradition had made him to be. And Samuel was just throwing over 1600 years of accepted wisdom by showing that he was actually a scholar. Anthony had been a scholar, and people came to him for his lessons and to learn from him. And I remember that both of us were incredibly interested, and Kari, who was at that time teaching Islamic studies in Oslo University, seemed to know a lot about it. And only last year I figured out why that was. Because last year she showed me this booklet that was published in 1984 and actually received an award. And I think you pronounce it Orkanen. I'm not sure, but it means words from the desert. And she had translated the words of the Desert Fathers, among whom St. Anthony was one, into Norwegian, and thus made the first book ever in the Norwegian language with the words of the Desert Fathers. And the book is made in a very beautiful layout, printed on special paper. And it was considered so special that she got an award for it. But this was the beginning of a very long friendship, because for some reason, we always managed to meet up when I would start making trips to the monasteries or to the convents or to retreat centers in the desert. And especially after I left Egypt and moved back first to the Netherlands and then to the United States, she would join me on my trips. And that is how we met several patriarchs. We met the predecessor of Pope Tawadros, Pope Shenouda III, and we met all kinds of people who were considered very holy. So the two of us were often really also thinking about that. What does that mean to be saintly? What kind of life do these people live? So one thing that people who are holy are known for is that they're very selfish or saintly. Let me use that word, saintly. They're very selfless. They don't really think about themselves a whole lot. And that is really what Kari was. Until the last day, while she was very sick and suffering from severe Parkinson, advanced Parkinson, she kept telling me, I'm so grateful when people come and just tell me what's going on in their world. I want to hear their stories. But she always had been that way, not just when she was sick. She never really talked about her own issues. Later on, I learned that she had been facing some very challenging issues. She never ever mentioned them. I had no idea that she sometimes was going through extreme adverse circumstances. She just never mentioned them. And at the same time, she was full of wisdom, and she was always generous to share the wisdom, to guide us, to help us think about our studies. And she was very discerning. She would really look at everything 2-3 times before she made up her mind about it. She was very careful, and that is also what made her such a good scholar. And she wrote a lot of books, and most of them are written in Norwegian. And many of them, if I understand correctly, have received awards or have become very popular, very well read, not just in Norway, but also in the rest of Scandinavia. So it was this book that really showed me that she had quite an advanced knowledge of the topic of the Copts of Egypt, and especially the ancient Coptic Orthodox Church. But the thing is that when you wanted to interview her about her life, which I started to do as she became sicker, because I felt we needed to really keep an eye on the things that she had to say, we shouldn't forget. She just didn't want to talk about herself. At one point, she would say, why don't you tell me something about yourself? Your life is much more interesting. And also, by the way, till the very last day, I don't think she lost a lot of her humor. I remember that we were talking, for example, when I would meet her in the home where she stayed in Oslo. I couldn't come before 11 o'clock because she had therapy. She had physical therapy. And one day I said, how is the therapy working? Is it helping? She said, no, not at all. But I'm the only one who's going, so someone has to show up. And also at one point, she declared to the people in the home that she was vegetarian. And I said, but Kari, you're not vegetarian, you eat fish and meat. She said, yeah, but that's the only way I can get vegetables here. So she kept her wits about her, and till the last day, like I say, she was full of humor, and she could see things as they were. She really, unless she, of course, medicine prevented her from thinking clearly, she was in the now and the here. But while I was interviewing her, I heard a little bit more about her life story, and it was very unusual, because she was born in a family that was basically atheist. Her father and mother were atheist. And she met a friend called Gunnel Wallquist, and who seems to be very famous and was a member of the Nobel Committee for the Literature Prize. She met that friend at a very young age. She was 15. And it was Gunnel who put her on the path of becoming a Catholic. And at the age of 17, she had moved to France to study there, to learn French and to finish high school there. And that is where she was baptized. And I asked her, why did you want to go to France, apart from being in a country with, at that time, or still a vibrant Catholic church? And she said, because I wanted to study religious studies. And she had decided that very early. And in Norway, that field did not exist yet. They studied theology, but not religious studies. So she went to France also, not to just in search of religion, but also in search for meaning, she told me, and to build understanding. So I have a list here of what a saintly person looks like. And there are many lists. I can make many, many lists. So I want to go through that for a minute. Because, like I said, Kari did not like to talk about herself. She also didn't like conflict. If she could solve things by talking about it straight away, she would do that. She was, by the way, extremely active. She was in many committees and in many activities apart from her teaching appointment at the university. And she was a productive writer, and she was a very good writer. She was humble. And she had that in common, really, with the person that we both so admired in Egypt, this Bishop Athanasius. I'll show you his picture shortly. And she always used to tell that she felt he was this combination of being matter of fact and at the same time very humble, while he was what she called a prince of the church. And in many ways, that reminded me of her. She was very matter of fact, very down to earth, very humble, but at the same time, there was something royal about her, something noble. There was a certain nobility of spirit that you could experience when you were near her. So let me go through the list a bit further to let you know why I think this person was saintly. She was a person with strong moral integrity, a very strong moral compass. That meant she kept her promises. She took responsibility. She admitted mistakes when she had made a mistake. And she respected confidentiality. You could tell her everything, and she was like a pot. It would never open. If you would tell Kari something in private, it stayed private, and it would never be shared with anybody. And so she also avoided gossip, like I said. She focused on what once she called virtuous language. And she liked to analyze situations. Whenever we had made a visit to a monastery or a place in the desert, we would analyze forever and discuss and discuss and discuss it. Over dinner, before going to bed, at breakfast, we kept discussing what we had observed, what we had seen, where we had been. But she also always did the right thing without expecting anything in return. And she was very generous without expecting anything in return. And I can say that because I had a job in the States that earned very little, and I had two children. This was after I came back from Indonesia, where I lived until 1999. And then we made several trips to Indonesia together, and she always helped me find a grant to pay for the trip. And often while we were there, she would pay for dinner. And whenever I offered to pay, she didn't want to hear about that. And I have never heard her say at any point, like, oh, I gave this person that and I never got anything back. Never. She just didn't. She just gave without any what do you call it? Pre-existing conditions. She had very high ethical work standards. And I must tell you, I constantly want to quote everything, refer to my footnotes all the time, because Kari told us and taught us never to quote anybody without mentioning whose work we were using. And she was always polite, also in the face of rudeness. And I have observed that many times, that people were extremely rude to her, and she was not rude in return. She stayed very polite. And that is, all these things are part of a very high degree of moral integrity that very few of us can muster. And her job was teaching. She had a lot of students, students BA, MA, PhD level. And she used to tell me that her books reflected knowledge. And now I quote her, that she felt that knowledge was creating a universe where we can connect and live together. And she said, I want to share the gift of remembering. So by writing down things, she hoped that we would remember. Now here is a picture of Gunnel on the left side, and in between there is a nun who took care of Kari when she was in France. And as you can see, on the right side from where I sit, as I look at the picture, is very young Kari. So in the end, she became my supervisor. I first was living in Cairo, and when my time there ended, I decided that I had seen so many interesting things that I should transfer some of that knowledge into a book. And someone said, why don't you write a dissertation, and then you can, graduate and get a PhD. And so I went to the universities in the Netherlands and applied for a place, and that is how I ended up doing PhD. And as you can see here, Kari, she was one of the supervisors. She came to the Netherlands for the defense, which was in Amsterdam. And next to her is Bishop Athanasius. And next to him is Sister Agapi, who was his right hand and his secretary. And we also became very good friends with her. And next to Sister Agapi is now Bishop Arsanius, who is the Bishop of the Netherlands, the Coptic Orthodox Bishop of the Netherlands. And next to me is my husband, who, as you can see, is a lot taller than I am. After I did my PhD, we went on to make a book together because we kept meeting people who had written about the Copts of Egypt, and all these dissertations were somewhere hidden, or they were written in languages that most people couldn't read. They were in Norwegian, in German, in French. And so we invited people to write an article based on their work, on their dissertations, and that became a book called Between Desert and City, the Coptic Orthodox Church Today, and we edited that together. Now here's just a random picture of someone that we used to meet when we were in Cairo. This was Father Christian. He was a Jesuit, and we would never skip visiting Christian because he knew everything of everybody. He knew everything about both the Christian part of Egypt and Muslim part of Egypt. Because in many, you see now a lot of the pictures about the Coptic Orthodox Church, but every time we visited Egypt, we also had an agenda that, for example, concerned interviewing Muslim leaders. And there was often something going on. And so we had to interview people and ask them about their ideas and what they were thinking of some situation. And Kari also used many of those interviews for her books. But when we were in Egypt, one of the reasons we kept visiting places in Egypt was, in many ways, we felt that we were in places where the divine was close, and where we really experienced a glimpse of what you would call the divine, a glimpse of something that we could not catch into words. And Kari would say, where the mundane and the sacred meets. And for example, when we were talking last year, one of the times I met her in Oslo, she remembered a story. She said, I'll never forget that story, where one of the Egyptian nuns was given a car by the patriarch, by the Coptic Pope, but she didn't know how to drive. So she drove herself around for six hours, and that was her driving lessons. That was, and then she dived into the traffic of Cairo and survived. And every time she survived, because the traffic of Cairo, I kid you not, is horrible. I mean, walking on the street can be even extremely dangerous. But after every time she survived, she would praise the Lord and say it was a miracle. And so that is something that Kari liked to see as a place where the mundane meets the sacred. And now I'm going to continue with a picture of someone we used to meet a few times. This is Mother Irene, and she was considered a very holy mother in Egypt, and she was one of these people whose prayers often, whose intercession often led to miracles, healings, miraculous healings, and other things. And Kari also felt that convent was a place where you were really close to the divine. Now, this is the picture of the convent's farm, or it's actually the second convent, which is now in Alexandria. The original convent is in Cairo, and this one was built in Alexandria, near Alexandria. It's actually on the road between Alexandria and Libya, and it looks out over the Mediterranean. But in the convent in Cairo, you can find this fresco, which is on one of the walls of the church dedicated to Saint Mary. And according to the tradition, Mother Irene saw Saint Mary while sitting in the garden. And the Holy Mother told her, "You need to build a church for me here, because this is a place where I rested when I was a refugee with my husband and my son Jesus here in Egypt." And so the nuns built a church in a place where there was really just a pile of rubble. And they created one of several of them, or one of them, I'm not sure who, created this fresco. And according to tradition, during the dedication of the church, miraculously oil came out of the wall at the place of this fresco. So this is considered a very holy place, and Kari loved to go there, especially because she had a very special respect for the Virgin Mary. And after these visits often ended with a wonderful meal, and that was always beautifully presented to us. And we really couldn't leave the convent without having a meal, without having something to eat, because it was considered a great blessing. And of course, our analysis and conversation started right at these meals. Now, this is the person that Kari spoke about when I last met her. The very last time I saw her was the 28th of June of 2024, this year. Because I don't live in Norway, I live far away in the United States. I had hoped to see her in November, when I will go back in the direction of Europe again, but it is not going to happen. And when we were talking the 28th of June, and already she got very tired, much more quickly than the year before, she said all of a sudden, "You know, when I think about Egypt, I see Bishop Athanasius in front of me. I see pictures of him in my head." And he was someone that she greatly admired. And also, whenever she was in Egypt, and I happened not to be there because she also had other things to do there, she would go and have lunch with him and talk to him. And we fondly remembered the last time we saw him. He passed away in the year 2000. And we happened to visit Egypt in February and March of that year. On February the 28th of the year 2000, he died, by the way, in November of the year 2000. At 6 a.m., suddenly someone was ringing the bell at the guest house we were staying, and it was the driver of the bishop. And the driver of the bishop told them that he had a message for us, who were still sound asleep in our rooms. And so people woke us up and said, "The bishop is waiting for you. He decided that today can be a retreat day. And so he came to Cairo and is staying in Motareya, which is the place that used to be a Catholic convent that his bishopric bought, and where there was now a Coptic Orthodox place for nuns. And it has a beautiful garden. It has a lovely garden, and the message was, you have to come as soon as you can, because the bishop is waiting for you in the garden and he can speak to you today. And all day we spoke with him. He told us all kinds of things about his own life, about his philosophy, about his relationship with people, about his youth, about his father and mother, and his family. By the way, one member in his family was a pope of the Coptic Orthodox Church, not for many years, but he was pope for a short time. And so he was raised in a very, very religious family, and part of the daily routine was to be charitable to everybody who needed food or something else. But we also fondly remembered some of the scenes we witnessed that day. For example, at one point, the bishop was standing in the kitchen and teaching the girls who were cooking the lunch that they couldn't just throw a piece of meat in water and let it boil, that it needed spices. So he was teaching them about spices, about pepper and salt and everything. And this reminded us that he actually had been quite old before he went to the monastery to become a monk, because in Egypt you have to be a monk to become a bishop, because he first had to take care of the children of his sister who had lost their father very early. So he knew how to cook, he knew how to clean, he had done all these things. He had been, like a family man, just he had never married himself. And so, of course, again, it took us days of discussing this, and I have all the notes in notebooks, and one day I'm going to make videos just about these stories. But we decided that we wanted to see the bishop one more time in Beni Suef, because he was the bishop of Beni Suef, which is towards the south of Egypt. It's not in the far south. It's north of Luxor. It's in between Cairo and Luxor. And so we went on Saturday, the 4th of March. We got on a train. It's a 2-hour train ride. It's not that far. We got on a train and we went to visit him, and because we wanted to say goodbye. And when we were there, he turned out to be very sick. He was in his bed, and he asked us to come and visit him in his bedroom, which was very unique. So we were sitting next to his bed, and we were holding his hand, and he prayed for us. And we talked with him not that long, because he was very weak that day, because the bishop had cancer. He was suffering from cancer for many years, and he had all kinds of other diseases. But like Kari, he never talked about it. He just pretended it was not there. He just wanted to know how we were doing. And so we said goodbye, and we were both crying. On the way back, I remember we went to the train, and suddenly, Egypt is sunny and warm, and suddenly a wind started to blow, and it became really cold and dark. And when the train came, it was as if everything had turned gray. And we were just really so upset, and we knew we'll never see him again. And so we came home, we had some supper, or went to bed in the guest house. And at 5 a.m, we both woke up, and we whispered to each other, "Are you awake?" And this is where Kari shared things with me about what she had observed that she would like me to share with you today. She said, "We rush by the daily and the natural expressions of the holy because we look for something extraordinary. We expect something big and spectacular, exotic. But it is really natural. There's nothing exotic about it." But what the bishop did is he tried to redirect the focus of our lives, of our thinking. He tried to see the other He tried you to see the other, and then he wanted you to see Christ in the other. Whoever that other was, by the way, the bishop was extremely popular among the Muslims in his diocese. So his examples are inconspicuous, and it could easily escape you. And his insistence was on caring for others and forbearance. Yes, people can be very difficult to handle, but let us try to walk a minute in their shoes and try to feel how they are feeling. So try to practice forbearance. He taught us that we are in a lifelong struggle against our own selves. And he said, by the way, one of the last things he said as we left, I'm a sinner, don't forget that, I'm a big sinner. But in the same time, in the years we knew him, which was about, let's say, 15 years, he drew us to him. You were attracted to him as a person, and it was an immediate attraction. He moved you. He made you think about your place in the world, and he made you reflect on your own choices. And he made you think and understand matters of life and death. And we were very much reminded when we saw him of death, because he was ready to leave. He was really ready to go. But he was talking about death as if it was very natural. And he was ready to go, but also he was looking forward to going. Now, this was one of the last things that Kari talked about. You know, she said, it is so easy to miss these kind of people. They are so natural and so unassuming. And they teach us that discerning truth from falsehood is one of the great tasks we have in life. And it's not easy always to see what is true and what is false. But it was Bishop Athanasius that was on her mind, the 28th of June, the last day I saw her. And one of the other things that she told me, that she did dream of escaping. She did dream of escaping the home where she was forced to stay because she couldn't take care of herself any longer. And she wanted to go. Kari's presence touched so many of us. She never planned to have a role of being a role model for so many of us, or to being so important in our lives. She was just there. But her presence transcended boundaries, through boundaries between people, boundaries between nations, between cultures. And that is why I consider her a saintly soul. She was an ordinary person with a saintly soul who is now free, and she has finally escaped. And this picture was taken in 23. This was Nelly van Doorn Harder for Ordinary People, Saintly Souls. Thank you for joining me today.